His keynote today is called Built to Endure, the Timelessness of Bitcoin Native Principles. I think Joe is ready, so please put your hands together and give Joseph Kelly a really, really warm welcome. He's come all the way to get here. Joe, the stage is yours.
Good morning, Lugano. Great to be here. Hope everyone's feeling great. My talk, as he said, is Built to Endure. And one of the most inspiring stories for me, personally, really since I was a grade school age, is the story of Ernest Shackleton. How many people here know Shackleton's story, the Irish explorer? Any hands? A couple? All right, actually very few. So just to familiarize everyone with Shackleton, so he was part of the early wave of explorers in the early part of the 20th century that wanted to go to Antarctica and accomplish firsts, be the first to plant a flag at the South Pole, be the first to walk across all of Antarctica on foot. So one of the most remarkable stories of endurance was, in fact, when Shackleton leapt on a ship called Endurance to try to walk across Antarctica, and they get stuck in ice. And the ice kind of trapped their ship. The ship started to sink. They were stuck for over 6 months. They had to bail, had to abandon ship, and they lived on ice floes, not solid ground, ice floes for nearly 2 years before they were rescued. One of the remarkable things about this story is that nobody died, that through optimism, hope, and adaptation to a new mission, all 30 or so odd crew members survived. I'm going to kind of come back to that story a couple times throughout this presentation, because it's always been a leadership story and a story of how to be as a leader, how to kind of bring your team together that I enjoy. As was already introduced, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Unchained. Started in 2016 with my co-founder, Drew Bonsall. I've been a career entrepreneur, very passionate about multidisciplinary subjects. We'll talk a little bit about those subjects today, things like complexity theory and ecology and models from biology. At home, I'm a pilot, sailor, and a dad. We'll also introduce some of those things in my talk. This is our crew at Unchained. Our North Star that we navigate to constantly is building financial services and serving the financial services needs of the long-term Bitcoin holder. That was one of the things we realized early on. This is my second startup. And out of that first startup journey, I really learned the perils, the pitfalls of trying to take a technology and find problems or take solutions in search of problems for customers. We knew from day one that the real customers in Bitcoin weren't trying to put real estate on the blockchain, weren't trying to do anything else for any other market except serve the real new customers, this new market of long-term Bitcoin holders. So to that end, we've helped over 8,000 clients secure now 100,000 Bitcoin. We've done that as a lender where we've lent over $750 million of US dollar loans without a loan loss, and we've saved a lot of Bitcoin from loss. What that time shows, that time in the industry, that time through these cycles shows is that we're survivors, not unlike Shackleton's crew of the Endurance pictured here. And what I want to talk about today is how it's kind of the discovery and the collaborative and co-discovery with many others in the industry of these Bitcoin native principles that led us to survive. Also, we hope it's the thing that lets us survive for the next 100 years and even survive our own success. To really motivate this story, I want to talk about, as I mentioned, ecology. I want to talk about systems of organisms and things that grow together, that develop together, that evolve together. There's an observation by Neil Ferguson in his book, The Ascent of Money, that says financial history is essentially the result of institutional mutation and natural selection. Financial services and a lot of markets work through competition, through cooperation, through various strategies, and firms evolve. Firms find niches. Firms find a fitness that lets them survive and endure into the future. Now, probably we've seen some form of this tree of life. I find this is a really, really great picture summarizing a lot of information. We're going to return to it in some different contexts. Before I do, just to walk through it, as many of us know, Earth was born many millions of years ago. It started with simple forms of life, simple bacteria. Many millions of years later, it became more complex, multicellular life. That life evolved into plants and fungi. And then later on, things that eat those plants and fungi, like fish, and then things that eat those fish, and then birds and mammals and things we recognize as kind of more the evolved and omnivorous and carnivorous organisms on the right. There's something also this diagram is showing, and that's called a trophic hierarchy. We'll come to that a couple times throughout the presentation. The idea with the trophic hierarchy is the higher level parts of that hierarchy eat or depend on the lower levels. So mammals and birds aren't going to get very far, aren't going to last very long without the low-level things they can eat. So there's a history of money. I think Nick Szabo wrote Shelling Out, which is one of the main core readings you have to read if you're in the Indian industry. In that essay and elsewhere, it's outlined that around 100,000 years ago, at the dawn of the modern human, we began to trade using collectibles. And even Szabo argues that there was an evolutionary fitness to that helped us adapt and survive and thrive as a species. Out of collectibles, out of using things to trade and exchange and store value, gold, through its inherent monetary properties and characteristics, emerges as a more standardized form. Once you start to have more standardized forms of money, then you start to see bonds and loans. You need places to safekeep those assets, so you start to see banks. Over the last couple hundred years, then things like insurance, long-term mortgages, long-term investors like pension funds come out. And then only in recent decades, complex derivatives, payment networks. And then as the story goes, we get Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now the most mature version of this history. It is now the apex predator, maybe. It is now the canopy of this tree, the most recent form. This is a very common model used by journalists. It's even how Neil Ferguson talks about the evolution of money. I'm actually going to argue it's a very dangerous model. It's something that can actually really trap you. It's a way that of looking at Bitcoin that's actually mistaken and has led to a lot of the failures in our industry. Part of that is because Bitcoin does not depend on those other parts of that tree to survive. Bitcoin does not need gold, does not need banks, does not need mortgages. So there's not really a trophic hierarchy there happening. What I'm going to argue throughout this talk is that Bitcoin is the start of a new trophic hierarchy. It's almost the beginning of a new tree of life, a new ecosystem. And it's actually the application or people growing up with that tree, using that model and trying to apply it to financial products for Bitcoin that's led to a lot of the failures. It's led to a lot of firms getting trapped in ice. Part of the initial failure, part of the initial learnings out of applying this mental model is that custodying Bitcoin is not like custodying traditional assets. There's not decades of regulation or monitoring. There's not decades of proof that firms are fit to custody, that firms have an approach that lasts and that we can trust. It's a bare asset, it's a scarce asset. There's not anyone to print more Bitcoin for us. So these expectations, or these things that we've had in our experience with traditional products, they're not there in Bitcoin, and we're lulled into a false sense of security when we try to treat Bitcoin like a traditional asset. Further, and the kind of last or the more recent wave of firms and financial services that tried to build products on Bitcoin, they were going to the banking business model. They were going to lending business models. They were looking at, they were falling prey, they were falling into that trap of, in traditional financial services, once you get a customer's assets, once you get client funds that you can sit on, you then, the incentives to do things with those funds. You want to lend them out for your benefit or your client's benefit. And what we found is the ecosystem is just not there for lending. There's not really a diversity of counterparties that you lend to safely. All these firms are more or less lending to the same firm at the end of the day. And so that temptation, that model of just trying to apply this traditional business model, again, it's a failed approach, and that leads to bad outcomes. We continue to tempt fate. There's this meme from Arrested Development, I think so poignantly puts it. There's just a way, there's a process naturally as we go about our lives and just look to the simplicity of a third-party custodian that we tempt fate. There's always these risks of censorship. If your ID is expired at that custodian, are they going to authorize that transaction or not? Seizure, theft, account takeovers. All these are still challenges with third-party custodians. What I'll argue is that we're at the dawn of a Bitcoin native species, that what we need to start to look at the industry as is the start of a new tree. And this tree could only have started in the last 15 years. Of course, there are technologies that are antecedent to Bitcoin, but really about 15 years ago, with the dawn of the white paper, the code, the scarce supply, you start to see mining and early nodes on the network. Those begin to specialize. Clearly, mining is a species. Mining is a type of thing that thrives and is an enduring part of Bitcoin. Custody, of course, there are custodians. There are custodians that are fit. There is a place for custodians in certain applications. Payments, making payments easier to use for businesses or consumers, that's an important leg of Bitcoin. And then finally, financial services. We're just beginning to see this budding part of this tree, this new branch that are Bitcoin native financial services. I want to talk about what are some of the hallmarks of truly Bitcoin native financial services and what supports them, what is the kind of new trophic hierarchy going on for this area. And for me, it starts with consumer-grade cryptography with hardware wallets and these devices. If there are anybody in this audience that works in hardware wallets, I owe you a great debt, because Unchained couldn't exist without you. PGP, email, encryption, cryptography, all the cryptographic primitives Bitcoin is based on, they've been around for decades. It's really been only once there's been this incentive towards all the value that we store in our Bitcoin that these devices have gotten easier to use. Even more recently, the manufacturers have built a premium experience around just the unboxing, the use, the cool factor of these devices. It's a thriving product category. There's an evolution here, and Unchained depends on it. Our clients hold keys when they interact with Unchained. Most of that Bitcoin we help secure, it's the clients holding a majority of the keys. It's self-custody, and we operate with these hardware wallets. They've gotten more interoperable. There's standardized protocols. People can exchange or move their keys or seed phrases from device to device. We're very grateful. Again, we couldn't exist without hardware wallets. When I gave a version of this talk to my wife, she made me promise to include just a really succinct point on what a trophic hierarchy is. That's what this slide does. This is from probably a fourth grade textbook or something like that. But the idea is within an ecosystem, you have lower levels of food that get eaten by other organisms, and then there's organisms that eat those organisms, and on. Now, you've seen in the space, and what we talked about when we looked at those other lenders and those firms, are people trying to start too high in the trophic hierarchy. They're making too many assumptions about where the state of the market is. What we've seen at Unchained is some of the most enduring parts of the ecosystem are really just the miners, and especially the savers. That's where we focus our attention, and not at these higher level financial products like lending or complex derivatives. So when the tide goes out, when the bear market hits, when trading volumes go down, you're the first to suffer. If you're at the top of that hierarchy, if you lose that food that you subsist on, those insects or the smaller level layers of birds, those smaller species of birds, the apex predators are going to be most to suffer. And I'll argue there are still financial services applications in Bitcoin. You just don't have to commingle them with custody. The savers, the long-term holders, they still need things like record keeping and reporting to tax agencies. In the US at least, our IRA accounts are quite popular. It's a way to hold Bitcoin for the long term in a way that's tax advantaged. You still need a third-party institution to keep those records, to report those things to the government. You need help and assistance in inheritance scenarios. There are trading and lending applications needed, of course. But again, what we found at Unchained is these are essential needs of a long-term Bitcoin holder, but you don't have to also custody the asset. So we've been talking about Bitcoin native financial services. We've been talking about this kind of new tree of Bitcoin. And part of my thesis and part of what we see at Unchained is that idea that it really helps set you up for the future. That other tree is a rearward-looking tree. You're trying to apply old models to this new asset. And the right way to invert your thinking is thinking about it as the dawn of new Bitcoin native applications. We talked about some of those early applications, those early species, mining, and all likelihood becomes just energy or merges with energy markets. Custody is important, payments are important, financial services are just getting started. We really see Bitcoin blossoming. We really see Bitcoin as money affecting and evolving and adapting into so many other niches that affect our lives. Whether it's with L2s, things like Lightning that involve as networks of data transfer and eventually maybe telecom networks. Bitcoin's going to play a role in how we identify ourselves in political systems in ways that combat or are more defensively oriented towards AI and attacks by deep fakes. And ultimately, at Unchained, we believe Bitcoin's going to be part of what gets us to outer space, helps us colonize Mars and other solar systems. So it's really this view of this kind of dawn of this era that I feel like mutually adopting Bitcoin native principles not only protects you from risks and doesn't make you go down the wrong path, it also sets you up for the future. So as I mentioned, I'm a pilot. So a couple lessons that I've learned as a pilot, one of the big ones is don't fall prey to get-there-itis. This is the #1 pilot killer. It's like a decision-making bias or challenge for pilots. It's the way many end up like that playing in the picture. The idea goes, the way get-there-itis works is you've made a commitment. You've said on Saturday afternoon you're going to be at a wedding or at a social event. It's on your calendar. You wake up Saturday, you plan to fly that day, but the weather doesn't look great. The weather's kind of iffy. You give it some time, you wait an hour or two, but the weather's not really gotten much better, but you know if you don't take off very soon, you're going to miss the event. You're not going to make it to that commitment. So if you decide to take off anyway, what happens, or what can happen, is you end up like that plane in the picture. So for me, it was an interesting lesson because it's talking about the commingling of wrong mental models that says, the weather and the plane, the flying conditions, has really nothing to do with what kind of social commitments you made. Bitcoin really has nothing to do with the traditional financial services environment that we've grown up in, except for maybe it as a reaction, it as a rallying cry against central banking and dependency on third parties. So it's a real lesson for me in risk management and what are the right domains in which to make decisions. And it's an encouragement to be more Bitcoin native in our thinking. We've been talking about this trend of savers. I don't know how many people here have seen or heard of the HODL waves chart. That's this graph in the background. I highly recommend just checking out. It's really novel, really something that informed our thinking early on at Unchained. The idea is because the Bitcoin blockchain is public, you can look at all the addresses, you can look at all the Bitcoin that's out there, and you can come up with a chart that tells you how old is that Bitcoin based on the last time it was used. So in doing that, what you see kind of from really the last 5 or 6 years, a really enduring trend, something that's kind of been around and been happening, and is really a quantified measurement of the behavior of Bitcoiners. And it says over 60% of all Bitcoin hasn't moved in a year or more. Some of Bitcoin's lost, but still a good majority, of user behavior in Bitcoin is to save for the long term. So again, that's back to that guiding principle for us at Unchained. I think it's a principle that guides a lot of, hopefully, folks here. And it's just something to not forget as we try to rush, as we try to develop products or make things that grow fast. It's important to have a low time preference, a long-term view in Bitcoin, and kind of be ready to ride this wave together. At this point, collaborative networks, I think it speaks at multiple levels. It's something we're really proud of at Unchained. As we built it into our product, I'll talk about. But also, of course, it matters professionally, personally, how you relate to people. Connection is very important to me. It's very important that I feel connected to my team, to my customers, to you all. And it's one of the ways we see the industry transforming over the coming decades out of very siloed financial products, out of hub and spoke style custody and financial services serving clients in that kind of a pictogram. At Unchained, I mentioned we help secure 100,000 Bitcoin. That Bitcoin is secured by over 12,000 keys. So it's not like a traditional custodian where maybe it's just a handful of keys if there's more than one. 12,000 keys. That's a really robust network. That's really something that I can feel good, I can feel proud, I can sleep well at night, knowing it's unlikely to go away, unlikely to fall under tomorrow. And importantly as well, I see more and more applications towards social recovery, towards anti-fraud, towards the kind of social engineering type things that cause a lot of loss in Bitcoin, as our clients and others in the industry hold keys with their friends, hold keys with their family. It's really important that if your grandma is holding Bitcoin and holding it in a self-custody manner, you don't want her to fall prey to social engineering. And so if you're holding a key, if you're there to check or you hear that signature request from her, you can help know that it's truly grandma that wants that, or so that there's not something else, something nefarious going on. So I think it's a very important model. Again, I think a diagram like this just helps create that context, helps create that sense of robustness and a more enduring network I believe we're evolving to, and the rest of the industry is evolving to as well. That's it. I really appreciate y'all's time. Love to conquer the Bitcoin, the Antarctica of Bitcoin with you all, and thanks very much.